Um, so thinking about what piece to choose to write about, Sibelius' Symphony Number 2 is one of the first things that came to my mind. Sibelius was a Finnish composer who was inspired to write this symphony by Finland's beautiful landscapes and his travels to Italy in 1901. He started the symphony in Italy and was to finish it a year later back home in Finland. It was unclear what Sibelius was doing in Italy, and I had a hard time finding out any information as far as what he would have been doing there. And perhaps it was just for a casual vacation. He spent a total of 1 year working on the piece before it premiered March 8th, 1902 by the Helsinki Orchestra under the direction of the composer. The popularity of the piece grew quickly and was well received by critics. The first performance in the United States happened January 2nd, 1904, performed by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. It is interesting to see that around the same time period that Sibelius wrote, other composers started looking into methods of writing atonal music, such as 12-tone rows. And Sibelius stayed true to the style of music closer to the work of Beethoven while still exploring his own taste of music. Usually he's well known for his orchestration techniques. He makes a lot of good use of modulation as well as theme and variation with how he writes. Yeah. So looking at the opening theme of the symphony, there's a pickup on beats 5 and 6, and the violins start on the third scale degree while the basses play tonic. And here's what that sounds like. The first melody that you hear is played by the oboe and clarinet. And then you'll hear a call and response with the horn and trumpet part right here. So the top voice of this duet melody has scale-like motion in D major, with the exception of some leaps in the third measure. The bottom voice is more arpeggiated, sticking to chord tones to give a better sense of harmony. There's also a little call and response of the horns. Yeah, I mentioned that. And, I mean, this is a good example of Sibelius and his artful use of orchestration. I think a lot of the beauty in Sibelius' writing comes from his ability to use simple ideas that are complemented by various textures. It's easy to forget as we write music that oftentimes simple is better. Here is the first variation of the theme that we just heard. So the second half of the melody here doesn't change, but the first half of it does. All of the notes move up by a diatonic second, giving it a more somber characteristic from the original theme. In section A of the score, this melody is repeated, adding flute and clarinet with a tag played by the clarinet and oboes. And okay, and so there's that. The next major melody precedes the B section and is played as a soli by the first and second violins. And in the second segment, all of the strings join them. I'm just trying to get to the part. here's where that melody begins. So this melody has a bit of compound and duple meter and very artistic use of dynamics that keeps the listener's attention. Sibelius' use of notes and scale motion with the occasional leap of fourth and fifth give you a sense of what the chords are implied without any other instruments playing. Leaving the whole orchestra out of this part gives the music a different feeling, as well as the start of a long build-up that sets up an upcoming string of modulations. And Sibelius uses these methods of modulations to build intensity, and it lets you hold on to a tonal center, unlike methods of 12-tone writing explored by composers around the same time period. These modulations give a unique texture as well as an interesting compositional effect. As I mentioned earlier, Sibelius likes to take these ideas and trade them around the orchestra. And he uses it in a way that you don't see in other, composers' writings. And here's an example of how he trades around his instrumentation. And so I put down on the screen, there's some examples that I'm not going to play, but here's the example that I will play. And that one's a little bit harder to hear because it's a little bit covered up by the strings. But when the idea is first introduced, it's introduced by all the winds, and then the second half here, it's split up, and every instrument here starts on a different note. And the same idea appears towards the end of the movement, and you'll hear that later. I'll show that. So these kind of modulations have a smooth transition between sections that seems seamless, and you can hear this idea passed around, and it's very similar throughout with some minor changes. The section after E in particular builds all the way up through H, where things come down dramatically before the start of a new build-up. And then the next little bit before L has a sense of resolution, however the intensity is still present up to this point. And the climax of the section is played by the orchestra at the poco largamente. And I'm going to find the melody that starts there. So this is the build-up. And here's where you'll hear the melody shown. So this melody is another simple but really good musical idea. And after the strings play this, you'll hear a small part of it is repeated by the trumpets, kind of another call and response thing. there's the trumpets. So there's another, good example of Sibelius' use of call and response, as well as orchestration. So ending ideas in the first movement. I'm just going to play this here for you. The piece ends similarly to how it started, and you can also hear the idea discussed earlier with the winds, and then he splits it up, and the beginning of that you could hear that played again by the winds. This time around, the drone note starts a little bit more powerful than it does in the beginning. It starts soft and grows, and here it's coming down from a large climax and diminuendos all the way to the last chord, and that's the first movement of this entire piece. So hopefully from this you've taken away a good idea of Sibelius' use of orchestration, modulation, and theme and variation, which helped to make this such a great piece of music. And again, these are just a few examples from the first movement of a four-movement work, all of which, was not covered. I didn't even cover all of the first movement. This is a great symphony that uses a lot of great tools discussed that have definitely inspired me as a writer. And not only that, but as a listener. Sibelius' music is really great to listen to. His symphonies are works of art that provoke a good amount of emotion. And Sibelius has a unique writing style that makes him a favorite composer among many people, including myself.